Welcome back. This is Felicia Moore, your host for Realty, Resources, and Reality. Thank you again for joining us. You know, we have been on our series on renting right, the must know tips for a smooth rental experience. And today we're going to get to tip number 8. But again, I certainly encourage you to do us a favor by sharing, and subscribing to this so that we can get this out to more people. Not only am I an associate broker here at Exit Realty West Midtown, I am also the Director of Community Resources and Engagement, which means that our agency, we are committed to you and to helping you. You don't have to be ready to buy, ready to sell, ready to lease or invest, just to ask some questions. We take free questions and we help give and provide the resources and information you need. So feel free to reach out to us and give us a call and let us know how we can help you here at Exit Realty West Midtown. So I'm putting on the screen my email address. It's askfelicia at exitwestmidtown.com, or you can text Ask Felicia to 85377, and that way I can get maybe your show ideas, things you'd like for me to delve into, or if you just have questions, I am here to help you. And again, as I said earlier, we would love for you to like this video, go out, hit that thumbs up button, share the video with someone who may need this information, and subscribe and hit that bell for all notifications. We would love to get our viewership up, and that is the way YouTube knows that this is a show that you like, and to share it with other people. So we ask that you do that right now. So anyway, let's move on, because we have been through a lot, but we still have a few more to go in our series, Renting Right, the Must Know Tips for a Smooth Rental Experience. And I have always expressed that step number 1, in case you're just joining the show, is the most important step. All the other steps, I just deep dive into them. But I want you to make sure to go back, if you're just now starting in the series, to number 1, because if you don't get that number 1 right, which is the budget, the rest of it is not going to fall into place well. Number 2, our tip was about location. Number 3, we talked about property condition. Number 4, we talked about that all important contract, a lease agreement. And number 5, we talked about the landlord or the property management team that you're going to be dealing with. And we talked about tenants' rights in number 6. Our last episode, we talked about the neighbors and the community that you're going to live in. And today, we're going to delve into utilities and services. Those are things that sometimes we overlook or we skip, but we're going to deep dive into those today. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, so you can go out there and hit that like button, at least for me, and then you can share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and we will be right back. Okay, as I promised, we're going to be right back, and we are going to delve into utilities and services. Now, I'm going to put my glasses on for this one, because the printing of the information I want to share with you is so good, but it's so little. So one thing is common utility and service items. Electricity and gas. Those are things that we quickly think about. We know that it's going to cover the heating, the cooling, the general atmosphere in our place, but those costs can fluctuate. I do know that some utilities, and all of us are looking for different jurisdictions in different areas, but some of those utility providers have budget where you can budget it out over the years, so that you don't, like in the summer when we have a lot of heat and you're running that air and it spikes up, you might be able to get on some budget billing. So you might want to look at that. But before we go further, I want you to make sure that you go back, of course, to the other sections, because the first thing you're going to understand or need to understand is, or what are the utilities that you are going to be paying. There are some situations where you may be dealing with a homeowner who is renting out a house, that they may want to take care of the utilities and have you at cost, or you may be an apartment complex, or even, well, if you're buying a home in a subdivision or renting in a subdivision, there's some things you might need to look out for. Are you separately metered, particularly if you're in an apartment complex? Because a lot of people have that complaint. You may not be separately metered for some of these utility services. So that means you're paying for everything in that whole apartment complex, and then they're prorating it per unit. That's not a good scenario. If you could avoid it, try to make sure wherever you're renting that you're only paying for those utilities for your costs. There are also in apartments and utilities on the next one that we're talking about, water and sewer. Now, this may be included in your rent, or it could be billed separately, especially in multi-unit buildings. And so that is where I hear a lot of complaints, particularly if they're paying for it. You may be paying. Uh, so let me go back and make it a little bit more detailed. Some buildings may be, and we're talking now about multi-level, multi-unit buildings. They may either be separately metered, or even a subdivision separately metered, where each house or each unit has its own meter. So that way, if you're paying that water and sewer bill, you're only paying for the water and sewer consumption that you have. More often than not, if you're in a multi-unit apartment complex, they're on what's called a master meter, which means there's one meter for all of the water for the whole unit. That would include the leasing office and the bathrooms there, the pool, and everybody who lives there. And then they may have a third party company, more likely, that helps to prorate and make sure that each, well, not prorate, but divide up the billing between each unit. If that is the case, you're going to want to know some things. You're going to want to know how that is done, how much they can increase it, how often they can increase it, because a lot of people get in, they start off pretty good, and then that water bill starts ticking up because that third party is going to put a surcharge on it. And if you're in Atlanta, we already pay the highest water sewer rates in the country, and so you're adding more on to what's already added on in terms of their costs, et cetera. It gets messy. So please, water and sewer is one of those you really need to look out for and ask good questions, because your rent included with those utilities can go up. And that's another thing that you really need to be looking at back when we talked about number 4 in your lease agreement. Trash and recycling. Now, some properties include this service. If they're multi-unit, they should and they have to do it by law, while others may charge you separately or require renters to handle it with local providers. So it depends on where you live. If you're renting a home, you may be in a jurisdiction where you may have to pay for that service, or it may just come along with the homeowner service and the landlord is paying it, and including that as part of your rent. Lease agreement, again, those are things that you really want to look out for. Internet and cable. Now, often and most oftenly, most uh, most most often, uh, internet and cable is handled by the renter themselves, and you pay for that independently. But some properties may include it with the rent. And so you need to find that out. You need to find out, particularly whatever you need, if you work from home, etc., that the internet and cable meets the specifications that you need. All of them are not alike. You may need a certain speed for certain computer or whatever to get the optimal performance. You may have a preference in terms of cable services that are provided. You may not need it at all. Those are things that you really need to ask about and see how you can provide it. Now, if you're renting a single family home, you may have more latitude in that. And then you may not. For instance, I can use an example of when I briefly was a landlord, and one of my renters decided they wanted dish TV and installed a dish on the roof. Well, you cannot go hard wiring and putting holes in my roof without my permission. And you can put a big satellite dish on the side of my house or anywhere that is fixed without my permission and it was in the lease. You need to know those things and definitely know them before you do them because it could cost you money. The other thing, heating oil and propane. Of course, that would be for certain areas that would use those, but typically they're not used and they may be prohibited in the property that you're in. You may be in an apartment complex and want to use propane to have your grill or whatever. You need to make sure that you're permitted to use those things, and that will be a cost that you would have. Parking fees, you need to think about parking. It's a service. If you're in a multi-unit complex, you may have a fee for parking. That's possible. Most you don't, but you may have to. Or, for instance, if there's a certain key fob or something like that you have to get into the garage or whatever, what happens if you lose it? You might want to know if they're going to charge you $250 to replace the fob or whatever. So those are things you need to just think about. HOA fees. If you're in a subdivision, you may be required to pay the HOA fees for that property, and that should be in your lease, and you should know up front if you have to do that. But most times the landlord usually takes that in and puts it into the rent, but it may not be, so you need to check. Maintenance and service repairs. That's the cost I'm talking about that's related to your HVAC. Any good landlord should, and you should ask about it as well, have service fees. For instance, at my house, the HVAC gets serviced twice a year. Somebody comes out typically when it's time to turn on the heat, and then later in the season when it's time to turn on the AC. And I pay a maintenance fee every year to make sure that that happens. Well, if you're in a home, you need to find out if the landlord is on a maintenance agreement and are they going to pay at least once a year, if not twice, to make sure that HVAC is serviced. You want those things serviced. You don't want you want those filters changed so that you're not breathing in all the dust and grime and stuff over and over again. You want to make sure it's optimal and working efficiently. You don't want carbon monoxide or any issues that could come from that. So you want to make sure if you're paying for it, if they're paying for it, but more importantly, you want to make sure that it's getting done at least annually. Twice a year is even better. The appliances and other utilities that may fall under the landlord. Typically, the landlord should handle most of those. Some of those other things may be that they have someone to come out and check for pest control. You might want to, see if they're on any contract for that. Termites, which really will fall more on the landlord than you. Hopefully, they have a termite warranty where somebody is coming and checking and making sure that those things are correct. So those are some of the common utility and service items that you will need to deal with. So how do you estimate these costs? That will be the next thing that we talk about, because you want to, back in number one, we talked about have some sense of what the budget is. So you can always ask the landlord or property manager. Often they have past utility bills that can help give you some estimates, or you can see if you can find out from past tenants, or knock on a tenant's door and ask them. If you're renting a home, you may ask if you can reach out to the previous tenant to get a sense of what those bills were like if the landlord isn't paying for it. If the landlord paid for it and you don't have to pay for it, you still may want to know just to be nosy and see how that may impact your rent over time, but they should have that information. You can also check local averages. Utility companies or local government websites can often provide that information. There's a lot of online tools where you can search websites for offers and calculators that can help you best estimate what those costs may be. And you need to always consider seasonality, and particularly here in Atlanta, it's going to get hot in the summer. That one thing has not changed. And so know that utility and electricity costs will increase with that. Our winters sometimes are milder and we don't have to rely a lot on that heat, but those are things that you're going to look at. We're going to take a quick break and then we're going to talk about some of those things that you should watch out for. I always want to make sure you watch out for those things that you need to. And when we get back from the break, we'll do that and I will come right back. We're right back. We're on tip number 8, utility and services. We just talked about some of the utilities that are common and service items that you should consider. We talked about how you can estimate those costs. And now I want to talk a little bit about what to watch out for. So I hope you took time to like, share, and subscribe during that break. If not, please do so. Help us out here. So, some of the things that you need to watch out for, and that are hidden fees. That's where you go back to tip number 4, our lease agreement. You really have to check it out and be careful about additional fees such as administration and processing fees for utility bills. I talked about that just a few minutes ago. If you're in a multi-level unit and you're paying based on something, because there's a master meter, there's one bill that the property management company pays. They have a third party, typically organization that helps to generate the bills for each of the individual units. So really, you're paying for all the water that comes into that apartment complex based on whatever formula they may have. They are going to tack on an additional fee for their processing and billing. You need to know what that is, and you also need to understand how they come up with how much you owe. Best optimal thing, whether it's water or utilities, if you're paying for it, if you can get into a place that separately meters whatever it is that you are getting, whether it's water and sewer or whether it's electric or gas or whatever it is that you are responsible for paying for, particularly if you're in a multi-unit unit, if you can get your bill for what you use and pay for what you use versus something that is community wide, and then they come up with a formula for individual units and tack on a fee for having come up with that formula and having billed you, that is optimal. So just keep that in mind. And those are questions you should ask, and your lease should be able to tell you. Variable rates. Are there variable rates? What happens if they want to increase the rates? That should be in your lease, or you should know, because you could price yourself out of a unit just based on the utilities alone. Shared meters and multi-unit properties. We talked about that. If they're not individually metered, you've got to understand how the charges are divided and if there's a set formula for the distribution of the bills. I'm going to keep saying that. Utility caps. Are there any caps? Some landlords set a cap on how much they'll cover. They'll say, well, I'll take your water bill up to $50 a month, but beyond that, it's on you. You need to know that. Again, the lease should tell you that. Account setup fees. A new accounts often have fees. Ensure you know these and whether they're one-time costs or they're refundable. And if you have to set up your own water or electricity or whatever, it would be good going back to number one in your budget that you've already researched that and you know how much it's going to cost you. And if there are any other environmental impact fees or the solid waste fees, etc. So I want to end this with a few tips for you, but it was important to go through that because it's easy to say, oh, utility service costs, and you just don't think about those parking fees or whatever other fees, and there may be fines. We talked about fees, but you may be fined for certain things if you don't do things certain way. You need to know these things. Again, that goes back to our previous tips from budget to understanding your lease and what you will and will not have to pay. So here are a few more tips as we round out tip 8, utility and service costs. Clarify the lease terms. And I can't say this more. Clarify, clarify, clarify. Understand who pays for each utility and if they're included in the rate, and if they are, how, and if there's a misstep or there's a need for reimbursement, how does that happen? Set up efficiency. If you're going to be in a place and you know that you're going to have to pay the water bill, you may need to make sure when you move in or get permission, if not, that you have water efficient showers so that you have the shower heads that give you the pressure but don't use as much water. But the toilets are efficient, so they're not using a lot of water, that there are no drips and leaks in your sinks or running toilets that are going to keep that going up. Your electricity, you can look at your light bulbs. Do you have the incandescent light bulbs or do you have the other light bulbs that are more energy efficient and will save you money? Those are important things that you can do if you're paying these bills and even if you're not, to keep those bills low. And then there are also opportunities where you can bundle some of your services. Like with cable, you can get the cable, but you might get the phone and the internet. Now, most people don't have landlines anymore, but if you're old school like me and just like the security of a landline, you might want that. You might be able to get all of those things bundled together. So understanding these costs upfront will help you prevent surprises in your budget and make sure that your rental unit is affordable and comfortable for you and your needs. I hope you got some good tips and information. I do also ask you to please reach out to me, Ask Felicia, at exitrealtywestmidtown.com, and to like, share, and subscribe to this channel because we want to get this information out. We will be back next week with our number 9 tip, our move-in checklist. So I look forward to seeing you there, and happy rent hunting for that perfect place. But again, go back to tip 1 if you're just now joining us. You all have a good one. And also, please make sure you take some notes. If you are just joining, make sure you take notes of this one. Also, you make sure number 1 through number 10 that you take notes so that you can check your own checklist off and make sure you're doing these things. I want you to have a smooth rental experience. I'll see you back with tip number 9 next week. Take care.